Christopher Hitchens died in December of last year. In his prime, the British author and journalist came to this table many times to share his views.
It's not for everybody. Not everyone wants to always be an awkward cuss or out of step or against the stream. But if you do feel that the consensus doesn't speak for you, if there's something about you that makes you feel that it would be worth being unpopular or marginal for the chance to lead your own life and have a life instead of a career or a job, then I can promise you it is worthwhile, yeah. To discover that after it's all shaken out, that the American Revolution still has some life and purpose and meat and muscle in it is, I think, a rather inspiring thing for someone of my age. I don't think I'd have another chance to take part in a revolution. And now, in fact, the United States is involved in a combat that is Jeffersonian around the world. The worship of non-existent entities, the attempt to derive morality from the supernatural, all of that is more, I think, than mistaken or irritating. It's becoming actually very menacing now. The people who think they have permission of that sort from the heavens are trying to kill us.
While he was being treated for the cancer which would later kill him, I interviewed him at his apartment in Washington.
I think a focus on mortality is a useful thing to have, and that's why I begin my book with it. You should always know
before you knew
your time is very limited and that you're lucky to live in a time and place where you can be healthy till you're 60, as I was. Most people in history have never had a chance even to hope for a thing like that. So, no, for the avoidance of hubris, I think it's good to have a sober feeling of the presence of death.
But did you only get it when you got to 59 and 60?
No, but you get more of it when you realize you've seen more sunsets than you're going to see. You're bound to feel a bit more retrospective about that. You asked what the worst thing about it is. I think the feeling that I'm boring. Anger I can't muster, really, because it's necessary that people die. It would be terrible if people did not. People have to die in large numbers every day so as to make room. I'm leaving the party a bit earlier than I'd like. Much earlier than I'd like. Or rather, it looks as if I might have to leave it quite a little bit earlier than I'd like. And not only that, but the party will go on without me. Even more horrible thought. But why should I be enraged at that? That would be spiteful.
Hitch wrote about his illness in a series of articles for Vanity Fair. Those writings, along with some others, have now been expanded and collected into a single volume. It is called Mortality. Joining me tonight, Graydon Carter. He is the editor of Vanity Fair. One of his first acts in the job back in 1992 was to hire Christopher Hitchens as a columnist. He has written the foreword to Mortality. And Carol Blue, she is a journalist and Christopher Hitchens' widow. She wrote the afterword to Mortality, which ends, "At any time I can pursue our library or his notes and rediscover and recover him. What I do, when I do, I hear him, and he has the last word." Time after time, Christopher has the last word. I'm pleased to have Carol and Graydon here. Is it painful to see these kinds of things, to read the brilliance of Christopher and remind you of this glorious life you had together and this glorious man?
It is hard. It's also kind of exhilarating because there's nobody like him, was nobody like him. So it's a reminder of how erudite and charming and well-spoken he was, and insightful. But it's also, it's sad, it's hard to watch. I don't know if you felt that way, Graydon.
Well, when you see clips of Christopher in his prime, you realize that when he was alive, how alive he was when he was alive. And there was very few people who sort of command the moment the way Christopher did, who saw the world, and I'm just talking about the invasion of Iraq, but he sort of grabbed the moment and crystallized in a way that very few people have in the last century. And I know for myself, there's not a day goes by when I don't almost instinctively pick up the phone to try to speak to him about something. There's something that he might write for the magazine.
What would be the conversation? I've just read something, I just thought something, this might be great for you.
Well, he was up for almost anything.
Including
Actually, not
a
even
makeover?
Not even almost. He was up for anything.
Even a makeover.
a very serious makeover, and he was a great sport on that. And,
He really was
and when
a
I
good
see
sport.
this, I'm not reminded of Christopher in death. I'm reminded of Christopher in life, and he is you know, he was about as alive as any person I can remember.
Yeah.
And that was about just the nature of a human being. You know, he'd been shaped by an education. He'd been shaped by the nature of his parents and his experiences. What is it that made him the way he was beyond that?
I think that some of it was he just
Fell in
was
love with
that
life,
way.
really.
Yeah, because he has a brother, and they're quite different. He just, I think he presented himself to the world in this fashion.
What was the best thing he did for Vanity Fair? Was there a piece that, above all, you know, defined him for you?
Well, it's actually it's not an individual piece. It's the sort of totality. I mean, absolutely extraordinary range, because he could write very seriously about serious issues, and one of the great wits about sort of matters of society or personal hygiene, and it was the breadth of his writing, and that sort of, you know, he comes out of the sort of the oral education tradition of England, and so he can he speaks in perfect sentences. I mean, he speaks in perfect paragraphs, and he and his writing sort of flowed out like that. So you know, you didn't really need an editor for Christopher. You just needed somebody to take the copy and get it typeset and put in the magazine.
That's basically how it went,
And
right?
you have seen him come home and to be a bit full of drink.
Yeah. Although I have to say, you know, he almost never seemed drunk.
Yeah,
he just had some,
but he could drink.
yeah, he could drink
And
a lot.
he could write while he was drinking.
Oh, yeah.
And liked to write while he was drinking.
Yeah. He would come home, we'd go out to dinner, say, with a number of people, and then invite him back to the house, and he would disappear for half an hour. And as, you know, we'd serve the coffee and drinks and everything, and then he'd rejoin the group, and he would have written a column that appeared in the paper the next morning in England.
Right.
This is one of the things you said. Offstage, my husband was an impossible act to follow. At home, at one of the raucous, joyous, impromptu 8-hour dinners we often found ourselves hosting, where the table was so crammed with ambassadors, hacks, political dissidents, college students, and children, that elbows were colliding and it was hard to find the space to put down a glass of wine. My husband would rise to give a toast that could go on for a stirring, spellbinding, hysterically funny 20 minutes of poetry and limerick reciting, a call to arms for a cause, and jokes. How good it is to be us, he would say in a perfect voice.
Yep. That's an accurate portrayal.
And there is no one like him on the scene.
Nobody exactly like him. There's parts of him you see around. I mean, the writer Francis Ween did a story for me in this little sort of eccentric magazine in London called The Lady, and I called Francis. If Christopher had been here, Christopher would have done it, because it involved a lot of knowledge of Woodhouse and Bertie Wooster and Aunt Agatha. And Christopher, I mean, you know, a lot of people know Woodhouse. At 1 o'clock in the morning, Christopher could recite entire passages from one of, you know, P.G. Woodhouse wrote like 90 books. You could choose a book at random. He could recite a passage from. I've never seen anything like it. It's like a great card trick that he can do at a bar.
Yeah.
He was extraordinary.
If he read the prose, then he somehow had memorized the prose. Yeah.
Was Hitch 22 interesting for him to write?
I think so. I think that he wished that he had spent more time, and he could have enlarged the second half.
Yeah.
But yeah, he loved writing.
Yeah.
So he loved writing that as well.
Well, also, most people who love writing, the readers don't always feel the same about
Right.
it. In Christopher's case, the readers loved it as well.
Yeah.
Be
But he thought
surprised how
of
many
it-
people who love writing.
That's a really
it doesn't
good-
quite come out at the other end.
That's a very good point, Graydon,
Yes,
and you
that's
must
right.
see a lot of it, right?
Yeah. More than most.
Yeah.
But he says it was recreational for him.
When did you learn he had cancer?
Really, he woke up the morning of basically the rollout of his memoir, thinking he was
This Hitch
having a
22.
Hitch 22, and he thought he was having a heart attack. He went up to the hospital, and after various tests, they thought something looked funky on some X-ray they had done. around the esophagus, but they didn't know what it was. But we were scared. The night that actually you introduced him at the Y when he rolled out his book.
I remember that, 92nd Street Y.
Right.
Yeah.
And we were backstage, and we were talking to Christopher and Salman, and Christopher looked ragged, but it wasn't the first time with all due respect, it wasn't the first time I had seen him looking ragged. And I asked him if he had a case of cocktail flu. And I looked back, what an unfortunate thing to say. But so I introduced Christopher and Salman for this 92nd Street Y, and, you know, they had received some horrible news that day.
Yeah.
Potentially horrible.
You would never know. I mean, he was like a show business trooper. He gave them, they had a full auditorium, and he was not going to disappoint them.
Yeah. And what happened after that? Didn't you go to dinner after that?
Then we went to a dinner that was hosted by his publisher, and there were various interesting and exciting people there. And Hitch was just whispering to me, I can't wait till this is over. Oh. But nobody noticed, and he kind of carried the table along with Salman and a few of the other more scintillating guests there. And then afterwards, normally he would want to go on and have drinks and continue till late hour of the night. But he kind of closed down the dinner about midnight, and we walked out of the restaurant. We decided to walk back to our hotel, which was maybe 30 blocks away, and it was the most beautiful night, the most heartbreakingly perfect early summer New York night, where the air was electric and dry and sort of body temperature. And we were having this walk through the city he adored, after he had just rolled out his memoir, and everything was sort of perfect, except that it wasn't, because there was this, you know, dark cloud hanging over us. Yeah.
And how'd you find out?
I guess I found out a couple of days later,
yeah.
And I really regretted that cocktail flu comment. and then, you know, it's funny because there's been a period in New York of losing these great public intellectuals like Christopher, Nora Ephron, and Bob Hughes, and you realize they don't make them like that now.
Yeah.
There's a million bloggers minted every day, and the odds of them becoming a Christopher are slim.
Yeah.
But why is that? Is it because
I don't know.
The opportunity to develop is different? I mean, you know, we still produce a lot of smart, interesting people.
And Christopher had a career that was hatched over a 40-year period, and he had one of the most remarkable careers because it sort of ended just as high as it possibly could go. It built in the last 10 years rather than flatlined, and he got better at it. He started off good and just got better. Yeah.
That's what's so amazing. It gets better and better and better. And he really wanted to write about Proust.
Right.
He wanted to turn his attention away from sort of nitty-gritty, everyday politics.
To write bigger things.
And Proust was the subject he wanted to write about. But
and why Proust?
Maybe it's something to do with the looking back.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And how did he decide to address the illness?
Well, actually, Graydon asked him to, in fairness to Christopher. I don't think Christopher was particularly thrilled at the prospect.
Right.
But he would do pretty much anything you asked him to do, right, except...
Well, you know, the very few people you had asked to write about this, but I thought Christopher, I took a guess, and I thought Christopher would write about it in an unemotional way. And he was quite astringent in the way he wrote about his illness. And the funny thing, the strangest thing is I think he hit more people that way than in all of his other columns or books. It was, in the introduction, I mentioned that a number of young people people in their 20s, mid-20s, who really attached themselves to Christopher, that he hit something in them that, you know, Hunter Thompson had done in a generation before. He was very much a standard bearer for a younger generation of, you know, sort of armchair firebrands, and he was the real thing, and I think they admired him for it, and sort of worshipped him in their own way.
Yeah. There are several interesting things about this. Number one is that, you know, he wanted you know, because of what you had asked and because for other reasons to write about the illness, but he didn't want to be defined by the illness.
Yeah, very much so. And bored by it.
Bored by it. And the other thing was that he both, on the one hand, you know, addressed the bigger questions of death and mortality, and at the same time, the specificity and the granular level of pain and suffering and being there.
Yeah. I think he was very, very stoic, and he never really complained. He must have been in excruciating pain after the proton radiation, which actually worked, because he would try to swallow or eat something, and he would kind of cry out. And that tells me he was really in agony. But actually, eventually that cleared, and we had a wonderful 20-course meal at the Waverly Inn with Martin.
You would never know that Christopher was ill at dinner, other than maybe visually a bit.
Yeah, visually, right.
He would not talk about it at dinner.
I mean, aside from the bald look, which he sometimes had, I don't think you'd know it, would you?
No, you would not.
No.
He wrote, "It's no fun to appreciate the full truth of the materialistic proposition that I don't have a body, I am a body." And what do you mean by that?
Well, you need this kind of corporal equipment to carry around your brain and your soul. It's pretty obvious, right?
Yeah.
I mean, luckily he has the writing that he's left behind, which has separated from the body.
Other than Proust, I mean, he obviously loved life so much that, as he said in the interview with me, you know, that there was so much to be done, so much joy, so much opportunity, so much entertainment to be done. But there were other things. Were there other things other than Proust that
everything? I mean, he was so easy to please. There was almost nothing that occurred in even ordinary existence, daily life, that he didn't love. He loved home life. He loved family life. Believe it or not, he loved
friends.
Well, friends, of course. There isn't a place he had tried to set foot in and visit every one of the 50 United States. And while he was sick, he crossed a couple off his list, so he only had one to go, I think, North Dakota, maybe. But there isn't a place in the world I don't think he would have wanted to visit and explore and write about.
He was very content.
Yeah, he was.
He was content.
Ambitious in the literary sense, but meaning I want to read more, I want to write more. But a content human being, which is a lovely thing.
He knew that he had done things and had lived life to the fullest.
Or he learned how to be happy.
Yeah, he took pleasure and was happy, and found something in every day or any situation to love, which, you know, if people have seen him at the podium when he's his most kind of vicious and polemical, they might not realize how sweet and grateful for every little thing he was.
The question that always came up, certainly when people realized that he had a terminal illness, was, will this change his attitude?
I don't think so.
No. He quickly reminded you, this is not going to be some foxhole conversion.
Exactly.
Also, unlike people who do what he does for a living, one thing Christopher did is, in any sort of conversation with another person, he made that person feel better about himself.
Exactly.
People like Christopher often make the other person feel crummy about themselves. Even though he's much more knowledgeable and much more erudite, somehow you went away feeling just a little better. And there's a real art to that.
Yeah, he was really generous with his time and conversation with any acolyte, young person.
He's very courtly.
And he did kind of make one better for having conversed with him. I noticed that time and time again.
Yeah.
This actually is a conversation done at this table after Christopher's death with friends Ian McEwan, Salman Rushdie, James Fenton, Martin Amis, talking about coping with death. Here it is.
Visiting him was, well, I mean, we all went. It was not like visiting most others, because he didn't want to talk about being ill. He wanted to talk about reading and what was going on and everything else. And then he needed to sleep a lot, and he'd like to find you there when he woke up. So the deal was, if you went to visit the Hitchens, take some books and some work, sit at the foot of the bed and wait a couple of hours till he come round, stir, empty his lungs disgustingly, and then resume. Incredible appetite. He really did not want to die. He really, I mean, for all sorts of reasons, but he really did hang on.
I think that going on writing till almost the very end was actually one of the ways of resistance. I think it was one of the things that kept him going.
I took a picture of him writing that last piece on Chesterton, sort of drips. And I mean, if you think about it, it was painful to swallow, very difficult to breathe. His limbs ached, his arm hurt like crazy, and he was facing eternal oblivion, and he needed to get these 3,000 words down.
He was determined to make a good end.
He was determined to die well, and it's very hard to do. And how is it done? And who was it who said that it is very difficult for a sick man not to be a villain? And he was determined to buck that law.
Not to be a villain or not to be weak?
Not to be... I mean, I saw him so sick sometimes that I thought I would just be whimpering with self-pity. And he was determined not to do that.
Not to go there. Christopher and friendship. What kind of friend? How would friendship manifest itself?
Well, there's one of the earlier clips, it said there was not a lot of anger left in him. He wasn't an angry person. I've never seen him really angry at anybody, and he had a very big heart. He sort of you sort of wish he would have gotten angry at certain people, but that just wasn't part of who he was.
But the idea of friendship, going back to Martin, I guess, was the first friend, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Was just central to him, because he and I talked about it, because I'm interested in the subject, and we talked about it. And I used to talk about getting him together with all of them.
Yeah, that would have been great. Well, because you said you don't choose your relatives, but you can choose your friends, and his friends became like his brothers to him.
John Scanlon, the late great PR man, once told me that he had a lot of friends. He said, because I wish my friends well. And that is the essence of it, in a way, that the people who are your friends wish you well. And I'll tell you something, Christopher didn't have a jealous bone in his body.
That's true.
And he wished the people around him well, and that is a big thing.
That's
he used to say,
true.
go out and thrive. He meant it. It wasn't just a saying. He wanted other people to be happy, to be successful.
It's the exact opposite of whoever said, it's not just enough that I succeed, the other guy has to
That's
fail.
core.
Yeah.
That's the flip. I've had dinners with both of them, and it's it's like the two masks of tragedy and comedy.
I forgot that was gore.
But actually, when in the years when they were chummy, it was great to be with them together. That was really...
It was dangerous, but like walking on coals.
Yes.
I want to show one last clip here, and this is when I talked to Christopher in that interview on August 13th, 2010, about the lifestyle he had lived, and if, in fact, he ever thought about what might have been if he didn't love the lifestyle he did so much. That certainly includes smoking. Here it is.
If you had known that there was a possibility of getting cancer, you would never have you've never smoked a cigarette, you would have never drank or consumed the amount of liquor you consumed.
No, I think all the time I've felt that life is a wager, and that I probably was getting more out of leading a bohemian existence as a writer than I would have if I didn't. So, and writing is what's important to me, and anything that helps me do that, or enhances and prolongs and deepens and sometimes intensifies argument and conversation is worth it to me, sure. So I was knowingly taking a risk. I wouldn't recommend it to others.
But you would do it again?
Yeah, I think I would.
That's the question.
Well, I've had to reflect on this, of course, a lot recently, and trying to imagine doing my life differently and not ending up mortally sick. But it's impossible for me to imagine having my life without going to those parties, without having those late nights.
You just can't even visualize what it would be like.
No, without that second bottle. And so the argument with Edward Said could go on, or not that he would be drinking that much, he liked glass, or the amusing exchange of limericks with Martin Amis could go on for another hour, that kind of thing. I wouldn't cut any of that out. No.
We all had the pleasure, you two much closer than I did, to know this man, and I thank you for coming to share.
Charlie.
Graydon, thank you so much. Mortality is the book by Christopher Hitchens. Thank you for joining us. See you next time.